Welcome back to Leatherheads Footy. My name's Morgan. On this episode, I'm looking at 3 breakout candidates in AFL fantasy for the 2024 season, starting with George Wardlaw from North Melbourne. Now, George is an inside midfielder heading into his second year. He's listed as mid-only and he comes in priced at 65, but I think he can go well and above that in the 2024 season. The reasons for this are, when he was drafted, he actually had a lot of injuries in his draft year. He had a couple of reoccurring hamstring injuries, and that meant he slid a little bit in the draft, but more importantly than that for fantasy, it meant that he had a really interrupted preseason, and North didn't rush him. They see this guy as a future, a leader of their midfield. I do as well. I think that he'll go into this year number 2 midfielder picked for North Melbourne behind Luke Davies-Uniacke, and I think potentially in the future, he will be their number 1 midfielder, and it won't take long to get there. So heading into last season, he was heavily managed. It meant that he didn't debut early. He didn't debut round 1, which he had the ability to, but he was really eased into it. They didn't rush him at all, played a couple of AFL games, and then eventually debuted against Sydney, where he showed how good he can be. 85-ish on debut, 9 tackles on debut, showing he's up to the physicality of the game, and he played pretty much purely as an inside midfielder when he did play from that point onwards. Again, being heavily managed. So he only had 60% time on ground average for the year and only played 8 games, and he rarely played consecutive games, which again drops your average because he can't really get into that consistency, build continuity week to week at AFL level. But I think it's the best for his body. You don't want to risk breaking down a young player early in their career. So 60% time on ground. Of that 60% time on ground, he attended 48% of the centre bounces in those games, which is really impressive. It shows that they want him to play purely as an inside mid, and as we know in fantasy, that's where all the points are scored. As well as this, he had a really interrupted preseason, so he didn't have the conditioning required to even run out full games, and then when he's on the ground, that's also going to be affecting him. Not in his attitude, because he is a fierce competitor. He always chases really hard. He always wants to get involved, but he's just not able to compete and get contest to contest as well as he will be this year with an uninterrupted preseason. I think he is an absolute lock for round 1, and he won't be leaving my team. I'm picking him. I'm going to stick with him. I think he's an absolute star of the future. He's got the tackling game. He's got the contested game. He might start to link up a little bit more on the outside with a few marks, but he honestly won't need to. North Melbourne see him as a future. Alistair Clarkson obviously likes him. I think he's going to play close to a full season of inside mid, and I think he's going to average around that 85, could even push 90, and he's going to be a really good stepping stone in your midfield. Next up, we've got a guy a little bit... If I can change tabs successfully. There we go. We've got a guy that didn't really slide under the radar at all. We've got Jason Horne-Francis. He did go pick number 1 in the 2021 draft, which is the Nick Daicos draft. As it'll probably be known, pretty funny that Nick Daicos will forever overshadow the number 1 pick. But I don't think that Horne-Francis is quite as far behind Daicos as probably a lot of people think. I think... yeah, potentially we're sleeping on him a little bit, and I think that'll come to show in this year. So obviously first year, number 1 pick at North Melbourne, obviously lots of off-field disruptions to his start of his season there, and he ended up averaging about 62. I think that this year, he'll push that 90 average. He's locked into that midfield rotation with Rosie and Butters, and it's up to a couple of other Port guys who gets those 4th and 5th spots, but it's going to be Rosie, Butters, and Horne-Francis in there. I think he would have had more of a step up in his second year as far as fantasy points are concerned, because he went from 62 average in his first to about 67 last year. He comes in priced at 68 this year. He played all of the games bar 1, but I think interrupted preseason, he had surgery on both of his knees. I'm not sure if anyone saw those pretty full-on scars on the back of his knees at the start of last year, but he had an interrupted preseason. This year, second year at the club, he's got settled. There's no news about him. There's no off-field talk about him. He's really settled back into Adelaide, and he went to the USA with Travis Boak. That's something that Boak's been doing for a while. He goes to the US in his off-season, and he spends time at high-performance facilities over there, like training with NFL guys and stuff like that, working with really, really high-level coaches. He took Rosie and Butters over with him last year, and we saw how good of a season they had, and this year he took Horne-Francis over with him. So I think that bodes really well for his conditioning and fitness, and a little bit his mindset. He's a guy that definitely is up to the level physically. He's really powerful. He can take overhead marks. He's a strong tackler. He can break tackles too, even in high-intensity finals. But he's shown that he can drift in and out of games mentally and doesn't really have that hard gut running necessary to rack up really high fantasy scores. But I think that'll come. I think that'll come with strong leadership at Port Adelaide. Spending time with Boak in the off-season is a really great start. The other thing is he had, really interestingly, in his first year, he averaged 62, but he didn't have as low scores as he did in his second. So in his first year, averaging 62, his low scores were 29, 35, 52, 49, and 53. And his high scores were 94, 79, 78, 75, and 74. So his high scores weren't as high, and his low scores weren't as low compared to his second year where he had 107, 100, 98, 96, and 90. So almost all of his top scores were higher than his first year, but he had 34, 37, and 38, and they were in consecutive weeks. I don't know if he was playing a little bit underdone, a little bit injured, whatever. Maybe lost a little bit of the drive, which can happen in your second year. First year at a new club, second year in the AFL, under heaps of pressure as a number one draft pick, and then moving home, asking for a trade after your first season as a number one draft pick. I think it would have had a lot going on mentally off field. I really think that those low scores won't be a factor at all in this upcoming season. I don't think he'll drop below 50 odd, maybe 60, and just that alone will lift his average. His top end scores will rise, but they don't even really need to. If he can just level out those basement bottom scores, I think he's gonna be a really, really good pick. Like I mentioned, he's a marquee signing for them. They gave away a lot to bring in a number one pick. Adelaide local, he's locked into that midfield. He'll play as a full-time mid. He'll push forward, and I think Port are going to be a dominant team this year with Butters, Rosie, and Horne-Francis now sharing around the ball heaps in the midfield. They're going to have some big wins where guys are going to cash in. He's going to push forward and kick some goals. Like Wardlaw, I think he can push that 85, 90 average, and priced at 68. Plus, I think he's just a great player to watch. So he is my second pick, and my third pick, a little bit of a left field one. He's only at 1% ownership at the moment, but Matthew Johnson. I really like this guy. Heading into his third year, he's mid-only, as all of these guys are, but he hasn't really cracked that inside midfield role, although I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Priced at 56 coming into the year, and he played 18 games, although that's a little bit deceptive because he played a few games as a substitute, and as a result of that, his time on ground was only 57% average, and he had some stinking scores in there too. So he had scores of 12, 16, 22, 24, and 37 included in these average, but none of those scores were when he played a full game. I think once again, uninterrupted preseason, I think he's the future of Freo's midfielder. I think that Sarong, Brayshaw, Matthew Johnson, and then potentially Hayden Young. Although personally, I don't really like the Hayden Young midfield move because he's so strong overhead and he reads the ball so well for his intercept marking. I think he's wasted a little bit in the midfield when you've got a guy like Matthew Johnson who can go in there. Matthew Johnson is tall. He's close to 190 centimetres. He's really clean, really composed. I'm watching some footage of him before. He hardly wastes possession, and he's got a booming long kick. Like, he can kick 60 metres, and at stages last year, he would get handball off from a teammate outside 50, and he kicked at least one really long goal, which is a good sign for a couple of reasons, because it shows not only does he have the confidence in himself to call for that ball and take the goals on from outside 50, but also his teammates know that he's a good kick and they back him to make the distance. So that shows that his teammates hold him in high regard, and he also has that self-belief. He finished the year with an average of 85, and he had some big scores too. Like, he had 111, he had a 99, he had a 93 as well, and that's with only 21% of the centre bounces. That's the other impressive thing. Liam Henry's gone out of this side. There's a spot open on the wing, so I'm not sure if Johnson will lock that down, where playing for Freo, they like to chip the ball around, so there's lots of points available on that wing, as we saw from Henry, we saw from Blake Acres before he moved over to Carlton. So I think he can score on the wing, like a 75, 80, pushing that 80 on the wing. But I think what might happen is he might play high half forward, pushing up to the stoppage. That seemed to be what was happening in his higher scores when I was looking at the footage, and with Lachie Schultz also moving out of the Freo team, I think there's a spot in that forward line. He might play as a high half forward, pushing up. once again, I really think this depends on how much midfield time Nat Fyfe gets. I think they've moved past Will Brodie. Jaeger O'Meara probably didn't deliver quite what they expected, and he's past his best. I think looking forward, they're a young list. They've got to get games into this young group all as one, so that then when they're all reaching maturity, they reach maturity as a group and they're ready to take that next step, playing finals, winning finals, and winning premierships. So yeah, he's a little bit of a smoky, but I think he's definitely good enough, and I really hope he gets the opportunity primarily as an inside midfielder. That'd be great. If he's in that inside midfield rotation, obviously lock him in. But I even think playing on a wing or playing high half forward where he might get forward status, I think he's a really good option. So those are my 3 breakout candidates so far. I'll have plenty more coming at you. Love looking at the first, second, third and fourth year players. I think they've got heaps of scope for improvement. And they're the guys where you can really get an edge on fantasy competition. Like, everyone knows the big names. Everyone knows Brodie Grundy went to Sydney. Everyone knows that Nick Dacos is a superstar. But yeah, I think these younger guys that fly under the radar a little bit, they're the ones where they can really take big steps too. They can get those 20, 30, 40-point jumps just by getting that opportunity, having their first full preseason, stuff like that. So thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.